rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh. Wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. A man once arrived in Medina, and he was wearing exceedingly white garments, and he had exceedingly dark and black hair. And as he arrived, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they saw him, and they saw a strangeness and an oddness in him, in that they had never seen him before, and he had no signs of travel on him, and it seemed as if he wasn't one of them. And as he came, he knelt down by the Prophet ﷺ, and he placed his knees along with his knees, and he placed his hands on his thighs. We do not know if he placed his hands on his own thighs or if he placed his hands on the thighs of the Prophet ﷺ, but in any case, he began to ask the Prophet some questions. And the first of those questions he asked him is, "Akhbirni an al-Islam," tell me about Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said Islam is to declare belief in the oneness of Allah and declare belief that I am His Messenger ﷺ, and to pray 5 times a day, and to give of your zakat 2.5% of your wealth, and to fast the month of Ramadan and perform the Hajj if you're able to do so. Then the man, he said to him, "Sadaqt, you've spoken the truth." And again the companions were astounded and were amazed, like how would he know that the Prophet spoken the truth? It seems as if he already knows the answer to the questions he's asking. He already knows the answer to the question he's asking. And then he continued and says, "Akhbirni an al-Iman," tell me about Iman. And then the Prophet said that Iman is belief in Allah and belief in the angels and the messengers and the books and the last day, and the belief in the divine decree, the good thereof and the bad thereof. And again the man said, "Sadaqt, you've spoken the truth." And again they were astounded and amazed. And then the man said, "Akhbirni an al-Ihsan," tell me about Ihsan, tell me about excellence. And to that the Prophet said, "An ta'budullah ka'annaka tarahu wa in lam takun tarahu." And then the man asked, "Akhbirni an al-Saa'ah," tell me about the hour. Tell me about the last hour. And of course, as you know, we're coming to the year 2012, and there is a state of frenzy in some human quarters because people truly believe that December the 21st of the year 2012 will mark the end of this world. And they rely on the Maya calendar of the Mayan people who lived in Central America some 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And many people believe that. The man asked the Prophet, "Tell me about the hour, tell me about the last day, tell me about the last hour, the last day." And to that the Prophet replied, "Ma al-mas'ul anha bi'a'lam min as-sa'il," that the one who asks the question knows no more than the one who is being asked, or the one who is being asked knows no more than the one who is asking. Meaning neither you nor I know the details precisely about when the last hour will be. And then the man said, "Akhbirni an alamatiha," then tell me about the signs of the last day. What are the signs? Ashratiha. What are the signs? What are the tokens? What are those preceding events, those things that will happen before the last hour comes upon people? What will happen? And the Prophet began to enumerate some of those signs. And he said, the first thing he said is that when you see the slave girl giving birth to her mistress, إِذَا وَلَدَتِ الْأَمَّةُ رَبَّهَا أو إِذَا وَلَدَتِ الْأَمَّةُ رَبَّتَهَا, when you see the slave girl giving birth to her mistress, then that is a sign before the end of time. And many ulama have discussed this narration and what the implications of those prophetic words were. Many of them arrived at the conclusion it means أَنْ يَكْثُرُ الْعُقُوقِ فِي الْأَوْلَادِ, that it means there will be some kind of a social involution, a social reversal, a social and cultural involution, meaning going backwards, something turning on its head. That the slave girl will give birth to her mistress. أن يكثر العقوق في الأولاد, that means that children will show impiety towards their parents. That children would become like masters over their parents. That children will carry the weight, will become like the dominance in the relationship between the dominants and subordinates. The kids would become the dominants and the parents would become the subordinates. And we see this at many levels in human society, where cases of parental abuse takes place. In fact, I was reading on parent line, 52% of the cases of parental abuse involves girls, daughters. That parents are complaining about the girls in the family, the daughters in the family, that they are the one who are abusing us. أن يكثر العقوق في الأولاد, and that is istikhdam. That the kids, the children will make the parents into like slaves, like servitude. So the parents have to do the things for the children because they're commanded and commanded to. So you'd find this kind of a social involution, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani says about this situation, ومحصله الإشارة إلى أن الساءة يقرب قيامه عند انعكاس الأمور. That this hadith is an indication that the last hour will emerge when there is a reversal of affairs. When things go backwards, when things turn on their head. So we're seeing this in our day and age, where children have this capability and capacity that they can rule over their parents and abuse their parents. The Prophet also said, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ حُفَاةٌ أُرَاتٌ, when you see the naked and the barefooted people becoming رؤوس الناس, becoming the leaders of the people. When you see the ones who were initially known like as shepherds and as weak and as ignoble in some respects. This hadith, there are many variations to this hadith. One of them speaks about those who are low, becoming ru'us al-nas, becoming the leaders over the people. And just some years ago, they were shepherds and they were barefooted and naked. إذا تطاول, when you see رياء البهم في البنيان, when you see the shepherds competing to build big buildings, tall buildings. And who's doing that? Those who are shepherds. In one hadith, they are Arabs. When they were asked, who did you mean, Ya Rasulullah, when this man left? Who did you mean? He said, the Arabs. Competing to build tall and big buildings. And then the man got up and then he left. And then the companions, then the Prophet asked the companions, do you know who this man was? And they said, Allah and His Rasul know best. And he said, that was Jibreel alayhi salam who came to teach you your religion. That was Jibreel alayhi salam in the form of this man who came to teach you your religion. These are some of the signs, the alamat or the Ashraat قبل الساعة, before the end of time. We know from the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are always living towards the very end. وما أمر الساعة إلا كلمح البصر أو هو أقرب إن الله على كل شيء قدير. Allah says, and the command of the hour is like the glance of an eye, or it's closer. أو هو أقرب, or it's closer. And indeed Allah has power over all things. That the Prophet raised his two blessed fingers and says, بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَسَاعَتَكَ هَاتَيْنِ, that my coming and the last hour are like these two fingers. This proximity, this closeness between my coming and the last day. But for us, my dear brothers, the most important thing to realize that there is hikmah. Like Ibn Hajar, Imam al-Qurtubi says, rahmatullah alayhi, al-hikmah fi taqaddum al-Ashraat, that the wisdom behind the coming of the signs before the end of time is this, إِيقَاظُ الْغَافِلِينَ, that it's supposed to wake up those who are heedless and those who are sleeping. وَحَثُّهُمْ عَلَى التَّوْبَةِ, and encourage them and push them towards asking Allah for forgiveness. وَالْإِسْتِعْدَادِ, and to make preparation. That is the wisdom behind the revealing of the signs before the end of time. To awaken those who are heedless and to encourage us to ask Allah for forgiveness and to make preparations for our very end. Al-Qurtubi says, rahmatullah alayhi, ينبغي للناس أن يكونوا بعد ظهور أشراط الساعة It is upon the human being to look upon it within himself and ask himself, when the signs before the end of time become manifest, question, what do you ask yourself when the signs before the end of time become manifest? When the man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked him, another man on another occasion, Mata as-Saa'ah, when is the last day? When is the Saa'ah? When is the last hour going to occur? The Prophet answered him with another question and says, وَمَا أَعْدَدْتَ لَهَا? And what have you prepared for the last hour? And what have you prepared for the last hour? That is the essence, that is ihsan. Not simply knowing the details about the end of time, not simply knowing about these narrations and these hadith, but thinking within yourself, what have I prepared for the last day? What have I prepared for the end of time? Like Hamid al-Qaisri would say, rahmatullah alayh, كُلُّنَا قَدْ أَيْقَنَ بِالْمَوْتِ وَمَا نَرَى لَهُ مُسْتَعِدًّا. We all believe in death, but we haven't found someone who is prepared for it as yet. And we all believe in the nar, وَمَا نَرَى لَهُ خَائِفًا. We all believe in the fire, we haven't found someone who is scared of it as yet. And we all believe in Jannah, وَمَا نَرَى لَهُ عَامِلًا. But we're yet to find someone who is working for it as yet. And so the most important thing is isti'dad, is making preparations for the end of time. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned all of the signs before the end of time, and he left nothing out. And this from the testimony of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, who said that the Prophet sat us down and went through all of the signs and left nothing out. But they would remember some and they would forget others. So Hudayfa ibn Yaman, may Allah be pleased with him, said that the Prophet mentioned everything. And we sometimes would see events taking place and we couldn't make the connections. We couldn't draw the similarities between the Prophet's words and the events that are unfolding in our time. But then some of us would remember, that is exactly what the Prophet said would happen, and now it's happened. And Hudayfa gave it an example. He said, myself personally, I would remember some and I would forget others. But then when I would see those events taking place, أذكره كما يذكر الرجل وجه الرجل إذا غاب عنه. I would recognize those signs. Just like I would recognize someone who went away from us, who was absent, and then he returned, I would remember his face. That is the sign the Prophet spoke of, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet described a world, my dear brothers, before the end of time, a world of difficulty, and a world of trials, and a world of tribulation, a world of testing. In one hadith he said, إن أمتكم هذه جعل آفية في أولها وسيصيب آخر بلاء وأمور تنكرونها. That the last part of this ummah will be given its tests and trials, but the beginning of it was given its preservation. في أولها, its preservation. But the last of it will be given its tests and its trials and difficulties. And so a fitna will come upon the people, a trial, a test, a difficulty will come upon the people. And the people will become shaken up by that difficulty. And then it will go, and then another one will come. And the believer will say, هذه مهلكتي. In this trial is my destruction. And then that will also pass. And then another one will come. And the believer will say, هذه. This one, that one, this one will destroy me. And then that will also go. فَمَنْ أَحَبَّ أَنْ يُزَحْزَحَ عَنِ النَّارِ. And so the Prophet said, whoever wants to save himself from the fire and enter paradise, let his death come to him whilst he believes in Allah and the last day. We will come upon a situation, my dear brothers. In one hadith, the Prophet described it when he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, يتقارب الزمان ويقبض العلم وتظهر الفتن ويلقى الشح ويكثر الحرج أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. That before the end of time, يتقارب الزمان, that time will be brought close. Before the end of time, time will be brought close. And again, this is interesting. What does it actually mean that time will be brought close? And the ulama have discussed several explanations for this hadith about the fact that time is brought close. That is not simply some kind of mass media cliche or a perceptual illusion that we think as if time is speeding up, or it's a cultural mirage that we see in front of us but we don't see in front of us. There are some truths about the time that we're living in that no one can deny. For the last 50 years, the speed in which technology has emerged and changes made in the last 50 years are perhaps more than the changes made in the world, in the demographics of the world, in the politics of the world, in the social structuring of the world, in the speed of technology, of communication, of mass media, of networking between people. More changes than in the last 5, 6, 7, 800 years, in the last 50 years. The speed of transport. So we are experiencing the world in a much faster way. In the way that we travel, in the way that we view and even see events. Like in the 1990s, you had the birth of the MTV, of music TV. And it was the MTV revolution in the 1990s. And the interesting thing about this phenomenon is the fact that what MTV did is it broke the barrier between scheduled programming on TV. So before MTV, the minimum time permissible for film makers and film editors between two programs was 2 seconds. That was the minimum time permissible to allow for a gap, to allow for a barrier between two scheduled programs. MTV broke that barrier. And from that time onwards, and now the minimum time is 1/3 of a second. 1/3 of a second between scheduled programming on TV. Because what MTV did is it created this discontinuous flow. So there is no break. It's just continuous music, one music video after another music video, and then it goes on like that. So that generation then began to see that world in a very discontinuous way, where everything is all one flow, that there are no gaps, and it's fast and it's speeded up. Al-Jawiyya al-Sari'a allati qarabat al-Ba'id, transport that is brought far close. So when the Prophet described and said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, satakun as-sana ka-shahr, that the year will become like the month, and the month will become like the week, and the week will become like the day. Kal-Jumu'ah, and like the week, and the week, Jumu'ah becomes like the yom, like the day, and the day becomes like the hour, and the hour becomes like a spark of fire. The time will be brought close until the year becomes like a month, and the month like a week, and the week like a day, and the day like a spark of fire. There are things you can do now in a month that would previously take you a year to do. And things that people can do in a week that will previously take them a month to do. And things people can do in a day that would take them a week to do. And things people can do in an hour that will take them a day to do before. And along this line, during the creation of this frame, the human being has also changed. Because his life has moved away from the active and has entered into the frame of the passive. Even in etymology, it's like that. Even we didn't have the word travel. That is a new kind of word, the word travel. And that came to the fore mostly after the Industrial Revolution. Because the original word was tripalium. It's a tripalium. And a tripalium is a 3-staked weapon, or a 3-staked instrument of torture that is like this with one in the middle, and people would be hung on it or tied to it, and it would be set on fire. That is the first word, tripalium. And in time the word tripalium became the word travail, and a travail was a torturous journey, a hard journey, someone's saheeh, someone's labor. So before the arrival of the steam engine and the
aeroplane and the car, people had to make effort. They were active in their traveling. They had to ride the horse, or they had to climb the mountains, or they had to do something that required some effort. And then from travail, you had the word travel. And in the travel, you become passive. So you don't do the labor that you used to do before. But then we move away from the active and towards the passive. Towards the passive. And that is how the Prophet described it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That we will live in that time of speed. He said there will come upon a people a time, a situation of difficulties. So much so. وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ, by him in whose hand is my soul. لا تذهب الدنيا حتى يمر رجل على القبر فيتمرغ عليه ويقول يا ليتني كنت مكان صاحب هذا القبر وليس به الدين إلا البلاء. By him in whose hand is my soul, this world will not go until a day comes upon the people in the world when a man will pass by a grave and he will roll in the dust of that grave and he will say, I wish I was in the place of this man in his grave. And that is not because of dain, not because he has any debt, but it's because of tribulations and hardships and difficulties. That people would prefer to be in the grave than to be on the earth, because of how many things are enveloping and overwhelming them. From one perspective, we know what is very odd and very peculiar and unique in this time are the number of suicides, are the number of people who wish for death. And this even in some respects transcends the notion of grave difficulties. I mean, on my way here to Qatar, the newspaper I picked up on the aeroplane had this story: suicide teens exam worries. And it reads like this: a student worried about his exam results killed himself just a fortnight before his grieving family heard he had secured the grades he needed. That out of fear for his exam results, he decided to kill himself. And so he killed himself. But then it came to pass that he passed his exams. And there are many stories like that. Just 2 weeks ago in England, just 2 weeks ago, there was a case of an 11-year-old boy who hanged himself in his bedroom because of bullying. And then a week after that, there was a case of a girl, 16-year-old, who was very happy, who had a lot of financial security. Her parents were very wealthy, and she was good in school, and she had so many friends. But her boyfriend cancelled the cinema trip, and so she went back home and penned a 3-page letter on Facebook explaining why she's going to kill herself, and then she went and killed herself. And there are many, these are just a few, there are many examples like that, where people are resorting to terminating, ending their lives because of what they perceive to be difficulties. And murder. The Prophet described, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, يتقارب الزمان ويقبض العلم. Knowledge will be lifted, and killing would increase, but knowledge would be lifted. In one hadith, the Prophet was mentioning something and then said to Ziyad ibn al-Labid, may Allah be pleased with him, that this will not happen until knowledge goes. Ziyad was confused. وَكَيْفَ ذَلِكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ? How will that be, Ya Rasulullah? If we recite the Quran and we teach it to our children, and then they recite it and then they teach it to their children, and then those people recite it and they teach it to their children until the day of judgment, how will it be that knowledge will go, Ya Rasulullah? And the Prophet said, ثَقُلَتْكَ أُمُّكَ Ya Ziyad. May your mother be bereaved of you, Ziyad. May your mother be bereaved of you. أَوَلَيْسَ هَذِهِ الْيَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى يَقْرَؤُونَ التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. Do you not see these Jews and Christians reciting the Torah and the Injil? And not acting according to anything in those two books. Meaning it won't simply be about reciting that will save us, but it will be about internalizing and acting upon the revelation. Because it is easy, of course, to recite. It is easy to recite and it is harder, of course, to act. But the salvation is in the acting upon, not in merely the reciting. So knowledge will be lifted and jahl and ignorance will prevail upon the people. The Prophet would make du'as in the morning, everyone should learn them. After Fajr every day he would say, Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'an wa rizqan tayyiban wa amalan mutaqabbalan. Oh Allah, I ask you for beneficial knowledge and a pure rizq, a pure provision, and from actions that are accepted. And he would also read, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa wa min qalbin la yakhsha. Oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from knowledge that has no benefit and from a heart that has no khushu, has no awe and awareness of you. And that is a product of knowledge for the Muslims. It isn't simply riwayat, it isn't simply narrating and information. Himmatu sufaha al-riwayat wa himmatu al-ulama al-riayat. Like when the Salafi said that the determination and the concern for the one who is the ignorant people are simply going to narrate, but those who are people of ilm, of knowledge, would want to carry the people by way of the knowledge that they've gained. So the idea is to put the knowledge into practice. This hadith needs also to be understood by another hadith. إِنَّ بَيْنَ يَدَيِ السَّاعَةِ وَهُرَ الْقَلَمِ. That one of the signs of the end of time is the appearance of the pen, is the manifestation of the pen. That people would become literate as a sign of the end of time. So on the one hand we have that knowledge will go from the people, and on the other hand we have that literacy or the use of the pen would increase. In 1870, 80% of the black population of America was illiterate. In 1870. In 1979, that they became as literate as the white people of America. There are 102 countries in the world who are at the 90% in terms of literacy. And there are 128 countries in the world who are at the 80% in terms of literacy. The extent to which they can comprehend and understand information is a different thing, but simply reading and simply writing. That we are living in the age of the pen, where people are authoring books, where people have used the pen to make and design and manufacture and create and build by way of the pen. But it's interesting, in fact, because you had these two authors, George Orwell, who people know because he authored 1984, and the book, of course, comes to the fore during times of social upheaval, like after the Cold War and after 9/11. People begin to speak about these kind of things. But during the time that George Orwell authored his book 1984 and kind of envisioned this future in 1984 where people would live in a very repressive human environment, where books would be burnt and you would have oppression and tyranny and injustice. Around the same time you had Aldous Huxley, who authored his book Brave New World, who also described a future scenario. And in his fictitious, and also George Orwell's fictitious scenarios, in Aldous Huxley's fictitious scenario, he envisioned a world where you wouldn't burn books. You'd have, in fact, a proliferation of books. You'd have books everywhere. But people, human beings, would live in a very desensitized state, where they have become numbed because of the gluttony they're seeing around them. And he describes the parlor walls in human, in-home cinemas, where people are so engrossed in watching and viewing the fictitious world around them, They have no interest in reading or learning. So in his world, it wasn't that you're going to need to burn the books, but you have so many books anyway, no one would be interested to read a book, because who knows where to begin and who knows where to end with it. For us as Muslims, we know of course the first revelation is read, Iqra. Bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who created. But the knowledge must be purposeful, it must serve a purpose. To better ourselves, to better other human beings. It must serve a purpose in drawing us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having the khushu' in it. Or a khushu' as a product of it. But much of the knowledge today, you don't find that it does that. And much of the books today, you find they don't do that and they can't do that. But we need to ask ourselves where we are in all of this. The Prophet ﷺ described a situation in the same hadith, وَيُلْقَ الشُّحْ, and that people would become misers, would become miserly, and that increase in killing would take place. An increase in haraj. In one hadith, he described and he said that the world will not end until there comes upon the people a day, لا يدري القاتل فيما قتل ولا المقتول فيما قتل, when the one who kills will not know why he is killed, and the one who has been killed will not know why he has been killed, and both the killer and the killed are in the fire. How does a human being get to the stage and to the state where he kills but doesn't know why he's killing, and where the one who has been killed doesn't know why he has been killed? From one perspective, one that is more social, one that is more national, at least in some countries, you have this gangster persona, the persona of the gangster. In the 1990s, there were around 25,000 children in LA who took an oath of do or die, which means kill or get killed. And this was an oath that they were required to take for acceptance into a gang membership. And so what they had to do was take a gun or take a weapon and drive in an area and shoot someone or stab someone or kill someone, and then that shows that they are brave enough to be accepted into this gang. And the most famous weapon for gangsters in LA and in America generally in the 1990s was called the Cobra M11. That was a preferred weapon for gangsters, and it had a very large barrel, and it could fire 1,000 rounds per minute. And that is a weapon that defies accuracy. You can't be accurate with a Cobra M11. So if a gangster wants to make a hit on another gangster and he goes to the restaurant wherever he is, and he takes his Cobra M11 and he fires it, there is no way that he will kill only his intended victim. He will blow up the door behind him and he will kill everyone around him because the weapon defies accuracy. But the interesting thing about this is understanding what is the psychology that's created for a people who would want to do something like that. There is a degree of polarization for many a people. We see the world from an altitude perspective, but when it comes to the gangster, it's all east and west and north and south. There is no human nuance involved in the discussion. There is no gray area, there is no shade. It's all black and it's all white. There's only two ways of seeing everything. So, if you examine then cases or examples of illiteracy amongst gangsters, in these kind of gangsters, the ones I'm describing, it's hard to find any one of them who is literate, because they don't see the world in that way. They see the world in the prism of the computer game. So in the homes of gangsters, like Barry Sanders in his analysis from A is for Ox in his book, if you go to their homes, you would not find a book. You would find TV, cable TV, you'd find computer games, drugs, and maybe some food. That's it. There is no reading material. It's all visual. It's all the things that you see, nothing that you read and comprehend and understand. So if your reliance is on the computer game, where the objective is to kill people or create fires, and the more you kill and the more points you get, and the more destruction you create, and the more mayhem you create on the computer screen, the more points you're going to get. And that's it. In Barry Sanders, he has transcripts of interviews where, they never use words like murder and kill and pain. They use words like exterminate, terminate, obliterate, annihilate. It's all Terminator kind of language that they use. Which in fact brings me to another interesting thing, Terminator itself. Last year, or this year in fact, April the 12th I think was the year in the movie Terminator by David Cameron, or James Cameron I think, where he had in his movie that Skynet, this computerized industry, will run the world and will defeat human beings. And he was in fact interviewed on the day, and someone asked him, well, it didn't happen. It didn't happen with Skynet. Human beings are actually winning the war. And he replied and says, well, look, the fact that you find most people hunchback over their Blackberries shows in fact that Skynet did win. That there was this reliance on technology in ways that perhaps he didn't truly perceive in the 1990s, or perhaps he did. But the idea is that there is an over-reliance on technology, an over-reliance on the mechanical, an over-reliance on the things that are created. One of the signs before the end of time, my dear brothers, is that the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, min Ashraat al-Saa'ah, from the signs of the end of time, that there will be yakun as'ad al-nas, Luka ibn Luka, that the happiest person on earth, fid dunya, on earth, will be the fool. Luka is la'im, the one who is unintelligent, the one who is like a clown. He is the one who has like an adult body but a child's mind, not because of an illness, but simply because that's the way that he's fashioned himself. And in another hadith, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يغلب على الدنيا لك ابن لك, that the world will not end, the last hour will not come until there is a prevalence on the earth of the Luka ibn Luka, this fool, the son of the fool. Meaning a situation of idiocy, a world where you have silly people who are speaking and silly people who are enjoying themselves. And everyone of course knows that we are living in the age of celebrity culture. Celebrity culture is one of the most powerful cultural forces in the world in which we live. It has utterly redefined so many things, celebrity culture. Where Shakespeare once wrote about, he said that there are three kinds of people: those who are born great, and those who achieve greatness, and those who had greatness thrust upon them. He never, of course, envisioned a situation you have to pay for a press secretary to make yourself look great. And that is the world that we're living in. So with the onset of visual media and social networking sites like YouTube and Facebook, it's easy for anyone to become or to arrive at the situation of fame, to become famous. In fact, you could become famous overnight by doing the most ridiculous thing, the most insane thing, and that would immediately push you forward in the throngs of those who are famous and celebrity-like. The celebrity has been fabricated, my dear brothers, created, manufactured, fabricated on purpose to satisfy our exaggerated expectations of what human greatness actually is. Where human beings have moved away from the reliance or their adulation, if you want to call it that, for the hero, and moved towards a celebrity. And this is discussed in America, in social politics. You have the idea of the hero who created himself because he's doing good things that are ideal-like. And then you have the celebrity who is created by the media, manufactured by the media. And you have the hero who does things that are idealistic or good things for people, but the celebrity can do nothing good for anybody, but can still become famous. So how does that actually work then? How does that affect us as Muslims? We too are affected, my dear brothers. We too are affected. Not necessarily by our adulation or admiration of celebrities, but in the way that celebrity iconography has been created. So for example, we now have Facebook. Now Facebook can have its uses and its benefits, but in many respects it's completely warped and skewed so many things. Because for many people, the objective behind Facebook is to score the points. And the more friends you have, the more points you're scoring. And the better that you're depicted or projected or presented on Facebook, the better you're going to feel. And then you're living your lives so that other people can be pleased with you. Other people's perspective of you defines your own happiness or sadness or whatever. And there are, of course, cases of bullying and bullycide and people killing themselves because of what other people have said about them on things like Facebook. You had the famous case of the 13-year-old Megan Meyer in America, one of the first examples of cyberbullying. She ended up killing herself. And you have many, many examples and stories like that. But what does that say about us? Why would we want to use social networking sites like that if our purpose is for that? That the more friends I have, the better I am. Attitude. So that is one thing we have to be careful of. So although we may not be submerged into the celebrity world, we can still be affected by the way that the image serves its purpose in our world, where we move away from the written word and we move towards the created world of the image. The Prophet ﷺ described a world of deceit. سَتَكُونُ عَلَيْكُمْ سُنُوخَ الدَّاء. There will be years of deceit upon you. يُصَدِّقُ فِيهَا الْكَاذِبُ وَيُكَذِّبُ فِيهَا الصَّادِقُ. Where you will disbelieve the one who is speaking the truth and you will believe the one who is lying. وَيَتَمْنُ فِيهَا الْخَائِنُ وَيُخَوِّنُ فِيهَا الْأَمِينُ. And you will place your trust in the one who is treacherous and you will regard treacherous the one who is trustworthy. Complete reverse. That you are unable to distinguish between the one who is truthful and the one who is a liar. In Sahih Muslim and Bukhari, you find the hadith of the Prophet described a situation like this. And said it will get to this stage where a man will say about another one, وَيُقَلِّ الرَّجُلْ مَا أَقَلَ وَمَا أَظْرَفَ وَمَا أَجْلَدَ. One man will say about another person who lives far off, because there's so much dishonesty and treachery. I don't know who to trust anymore. That someone will say about another person living in a far distance, oh, that person, what a good person that person is. And how strong he is. And how good he is. But the Prophet said, وَمَا فِي قَلْبِهِ مِثْقَالُ حَبَّةٍ خَرْدَلٍ مِنْ الْإِيمَانِ. But that person doesn't even have an atom's weight of Iman in his heart. But that person doesn't even have an atom's weight of Iman in his heart. That the outward might seem appealing, that he might be honest. One out of the million who are not honest, and he is honest, but his biggest problem is he doesn't even pray. He doesn't even believe. And people actually speak like that. Oh, this person is very sharif, they say. And he's very noble. And he's very good. Let's marry our daughter off to him. Because he's very sharif and he doesn't drink, doesn't smoke. But doesn't pray either. and doesn't know anything either, and has no iman in his heart either. Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, described the situation. كيف أنتم إذا لبستكم فتنة? How will you be when fitna clothes you? يربو فيها الصغير ويحرم فيها الكبير. The one who is young will grow older, and the one who is old will grow older. A time of confusion. A time of confusion. It continues. وَمَتَى ذَاكَ? And when will that be? إِذَا كَثُرَ قُرَّاؤُكُمْ وَقَلَّ فُقَهَاؤُكُمْ وَكَثُرَتْ أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَقَلَّ أُمَنَاؤُكُمْ. When your Quran reciters become many, but your fuqaha, your scholars become less. And when your money increases, but your trustworthiness decreases. Your money will increase, you become more wealthy, but your honesty will decrease. I mean, think about why Sayyidina Umar specified Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiyallahu anhuma. During the situation when he asked his companions, Tamannu, make a wish. And a man gets up and he says, Atamanna, I wish that this room was full of gold and silver, and I would use that gold and silver in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he sat down, and again Umar asked again, make a wish. Another man, he gets up and he says, I wish this room was full of diamonds and rubies and pearls, and I would use all of that in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he said again, make a wish. Another man gets up and he says, why don't you make a wish, O Umar? And Sayyidina Umar says, if I was to make a wish, I would wish for this room to be full of men like Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Because he was the ameen of this ummah from the hadith. Inna li kulli ummatin ameen, and every ummah has its trustworthy one. And the Prophet said the trustworthy one of our nation, of our ummah, is Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. When the Christians came from Najran, and they asked, they said, Ib'ath lana rajulan aminan, send to us a truthful person. They didn't ask for the most learned, or the strongest, or the most brave, but they asked simply, give us the most trustworthy one of you. And the Prophet said, I will send to you someone who is ameen, haqqa ameen, someone who is truly honest and truly truthful. And Sahaba, they began to look amongst themselves again, maybe it should be me, or it should be me. But the Prophet sent to them Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. May Allah be pleased with him. Imam al-Shafi'i says, إن الفقيه هو الفقيه بفعله ليس الفقيه بنطقه ومقاله وكذا الرئيس هو الرئيس بحسنه ليس الرئيس بملكه وبماله وكذا الغني هو الغني بخلقه ليس الغني بمقام ورجاله. The one who is a scholar, the faqih, is a scholar by way of his actions, not on account of his nice tongue and good talk. And like that, the leader over the people is a leader on account of his goodness, not on account of his large armies and on account of his kingdom. And like the one who is wealthy on account of his good disposition, not wealthy on account of his money and so on and so forth. That there will come a time where we will lose this essence. It will be about the outer and the outward. And these will become the symbols of success and progress and everything else. But the inner qualities would be lacking amongst people. So on the one hand, then back to the hadith about the one who will be killed, will not know why he's killing, and the one who will be killed will not know why he has been killed. On the one hand, you have the persona of the gangster who cannot see the other person as a human being, because he lives in a very polarized world of only black and white. He's only them and us. There's no way of ever seeing any gray area, any shade in this paradigm in which he lives. And the other one, of course, is in a very international one. Now, if you go to 2007, you might remember there was the Virginia Tech incident in America where this crazed gunman, he went in and he killed these 30 or 33 students, one of whom was a Muslim, may Allah have mercy on his soul, but he killed them and then he killed himself. Now, initially it was depicted or dubbed as the worst shooting on American soil. And it was terrible. But one of the first, I think the first group that really raised its voice in objection to what the Americans depicted as the worst shooting on American soil were the native Indians, the Native Americans, the Red Indians as people call them. They said, have you forgotten the incident in 1865, the Sand Creek Massacre, where we were slaughtered and more than 33 of us, hundreds of us were slaughtered in the land grab where America was grabbing land for itself and pushing these people who they depicted as uncivilized, barbaric, pushing them out. In World War II, 61% of the people killed were civilians. In Korea, 67% of the people killed were civilians. In Vietnam, 77% of the people killed were civilians. In the drone war now in Pakistan, 98% of the people are what they would call civilians. May Allah have mercy on all of their souls. We're dealing with numbers on a massive scale. If you take the events of 1945 in Hamburg or in Tokyo, these were the first cases in recorded human history where firestorms have been created. In March 1945, General Curtis LeMay sent 300 B-29 bombers over Hamburg. And it was only 15 miles radius of that city and a very dense civilian population. And it was a warm summer evening and a tight concentration of people. And they began by dropping 3 or 5 pound incendiaries to set fire to the roofs of buildings. And then they dropped 30-pound incendiaries to enter and penetrate inside the buildings. And then they dropped 3,000-pound incendiaries to create craters in the roads to prevent the firefighting crews from arriving. The air temperature in Hamburg on that night was 800 degrees Celsius. The air temperature. That was the day they said the air caught fire. The similar firestorm created in Tokyo in the same year, or 43, the eyewitnesses, they said that, people were like matchsticks, on fire, just burnt alive. How many were killed? 80,000 people. They said there probably isn't a situation, as far as they know, Allah knows best, where that many people have been killed by fire in a 6-hour stretch. Now, did all the people know why on earth they're killing? Why on earth they're being killed? The mother nursing her child, why am I being killed? The kids playing football or playing around, why are we being killed? Now, the one who is flying his B-29 from altitude, from that high position, and he's dropping the bomb, does he truly understand the ramifications of his mass murder and mass killing? Because he's so high up, and that is the connection between the altitude and the attitude. The higher up you are, the less human empathy you will ever feel. Everyone, in fact everyone, has a human capacity to be like this. Everyone of us can be like that. So we're not simply looking down on some people. The essence is, if we live in the altitude, or our heads are above the clouds, you will lose your human empathy. You will lose it. Because your world is your world. It's you. No one else exists. So this physical distance between the one who is bombing and the this is why the number of conscientious objectors now, if you read the works of Amy Goodman, now those who are objecting to the war in Iraq, who form the IVO, Iraqi Veterans Against the War, The numbers are very high, like Vietnam, because they come back with, they didn't see the harm that they've created and the carnage that they've created in other people's lives. When you're from that altitude, you don't see it, but you feel it. And you will go on to feel it. And so this is why they have the post-traumatic stress disorder. I was just watching a report just the other day on RT, that the number of American soldiers who have killed themselves is more than number of soldiers who have died in combat. Who killed them? They did. They killed themselves. Because of this being confronted with the reality of this is what we've done. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. Corruption has manifested itself on land and on sea because of what man has done with his own two hands. ليذيقهم بعض الذي عملوا. So Allah will give them a taste of some of what they themselves have done, so that they may return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the Quranic way. That Allah wants people to go back to Him. And Allah will teach people a lesson in some respect, in some ways. So as a lesson, therefore, we should never ever harbor that kind of feeling of altitude, that we are so high up, we can't simply see what's happening down on earth. Or we are so pious, and I'm the best Muslim, and that you lose your feelings for those who are, in your mind, subordinate. They're weaker than you, they're less than you, or they're different color skin than you. Racism. Even there has been amazing stories even amongst those who are not even Muslims. The case of Harriet Beecher Stowe, I think, is one of the most remarkable examples in America, in American history, of a woman who was a white woman. This is during the time where people were debating, should we, pro-abolition, abolitionists, do we stick with slavery or do we prohibit, abolish it? Slavery of black people who were snatched from Africa, stolen from Africa, and sold in auctions where their families are separated and divided and broken up. What do we do? And her father was a priest, Christian priest, and he was against slavery, but she couldn't be bothered with the whole thing. Like, doesn't truly concern me in any way. Until her son died. Her baby, her child died, and then it was a wake-up call for her, and she thought to herself, no, this pain I'm experiencing inside of me now is the same pain that an African woman who is separated from her child in an auction feels and experiences. And she wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which sold more copies in the 1860s than any other book except the Bible. And when Abraham Lincoln met her, she was one of the causes of the American Civil War. He said to her, are you the old woman who wrote the book that caused this war? And this is fictitious. It's only a fictitious depiction of a man who she wanted to depict in a very good light so that people could simply see, don't lose your human empathy for other people. But one of the signs of the end of time, like this hadith it says, is that people will kill indiscriminately and massacre. And this is, of course, created through dehumanizing the other. So just like the native Indians were depicted as barbaric, just like the Afro-Americans were depicted as niggers, or will envelop you, will cover you like pieces of a dark night, will cover you. يصبح الرجل مؤمنا ويمسي كافرا ويمسي مؤمنا ويصبح كافرا. A man will wake up as a believer, and he will go to sleep as a disbeliever, as a kafir, and he will go to sleep as a believer, and he will wake up as a disbeliever. It doesn't simply mean that he will have some loss in his taqwa. It means he will completely abandon his faith, from iman to kufr, in the space of a day or in the space of a night. In the hadith Sahih Muslim, يَبِيعَ دِينَهُ بِعَرَضٍ مِّنَ الدُّنْيَا. He will sell his religion for a small price from this dunya. he will sell his religion. That's it. Apostasy. People who will leave Islam, people who will abandon Islam. And in light of this, you have the hadith where the Prophet mentioned, إِنَّ دَجَّالُونَ كَذَّابُونَ يَأْتُونَكُم مِّنَ الْأَحَادِيثِ بِمَا لَمْ تَسْمَعُوا أَنْتُمْ وَلَا آبَاؤُكُمْ فَإِيَّاكُمْ وَإِيَّاهُمْ لَيُضِلُّونَكُمْ وَلَيَفْتِنُونَكُمْ. That before the end of time there will be Dajjalun, Kadhabun. There will be imposters and liars. And they will come to you with a talk that neither you've heard before or your fathers have ever heard before. New talk, like a revisionist Islam, a revised version of Islam, a repackaged, redefined Islam to suit everyone. But the Prophet said, beware of them, and your fathers should beware of them. They should not misguide you, they should not be a trial for you. The Prophet described a world where sins will increase, and open sins will increase, and homosexuality will increase, and adultery will increase. And now you have homosexuality, you have marriages of homosexuals, you have homosexual priests, you have an increase in homosexuality, you have an increase in adultery, where adultery is glorified in the mass media and in movies. And all these signs before the end of time signal bigger things that will come, my dear brothers. Major signs before the Day of Judgment. And one of them, of course, is the arrival of the Dajjal, the arrival of what people call the Antichrist. And we will inshallah save his story, or what will pertain to him, for another day, the day after tomorrow, inshallah. But please, inshallah, try and come tomorrow, because there are other signs of importance. In one hadith, the Prophet also mentioned, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, يُشِكُ الْأُمَّ مَنْ تَدَاعَ عَلَيْكُمْ كَمَا تَدَاعَ الْأَكْلِ إِلَى قَصْعَتِهَا. Soon the nations of the world will gather to eat of you, fight you, the way they gather to eat a meal, partake in eating a meal. And the companions, they were shocked. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, will we be a few in number on that day? He said, بَلْ أَنْتُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ بِكَثِيرٍ. You will in fact on that day be many, many people. Allah will take the fear out of the hearts of your enemies and place that fear into your hearts. And you'll be like غُثَاء كَغُثَاءِ السَّيْلِ. You'll be like the froth on the sea. You'll be like scum, despicable, utter rubbish, no regard for you, worthless. Anything can happen to you. There's no reaction, nothing. Blind, deaf, nothing. And the companions, they said, Ya Rasulullah, well, is it because we will be few? Is that why it will happen? The Prophet said, no, you'll be large in number, but you'll be like this. And you will have wahan, you will have this disease called wahan in your hearts. And they said, what is that, Ya Rasulullah? And he said, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَكَرَاهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ. You will love dunya and you will hate death. You will love dunya and you will hate death. You will not have the willingness to make any effort for anything if you're infatuated and in love with the dunya. And although I might give examples of the West, we might also think about what is happening here and elsewhere. Just the day before yesterday, there was a story in America. They're selling a new pair of trainers called Nike Air Jordan 2 Retro Concord. It's called Nike Air Jordan 2 Retro Concord. Right? And they had a pre-sale of these trainers in America, and they were selling about 300 of them for a price of $180. each prepared. And so 2,000 people gathered 4:30 a.m. in the morning, before the shop opens at 5 a.m. in the morning, to buy these trainers. Right? It's so ironic, this story. Number one, they broke the door. They took off the door in their stampede to try and buy these trainers. But the irony is that many of them, in fact, lost their shoes in the chaos. They lost their own shoes. You know, they went to buy shoes, but then they ended up losing their own shoes. And although you might think, well, that's bad, but think what happens in other countries, where people spend so much money to make their cars look so flash. Right? That happens not only in the West, it happens in the East. It happens everywhere, where people have this infatuation and fixation with dunya. May Allah save us from being in that state. May Allah forgive us and have mercy on us and protect us in these difficult and testing times. May Allah make us a people of resolve, a people of himmah, and a people who take the lessons from these hadith, from these signs before the end of time, and just go back to what we began when the ulama, they said that the hikmah, the wisdom behind the revealing of these signs is iqadul ghafilin, to wake up those who are heedless and to push them towards tawbah, towards asking Allah for forgiveness and repentance, and to make preparations. To make preparations, my dear brothers, for our Qiyamah, Qiyamah al-Sughra wa Qiyamah al-Kubra, our smaller hour, which is the hour that we will all die, and the greater hour, which is the Day of Judgment itself. May Allah protect us and keep us strong in these times. There are many, many good things that will happen. It's not all gloom and doom. Many great things will happen, and we will inshallah mention some of them bi'idhnillah tomorrow. May Allah send His peace and blessings upon Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa ashabihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.